All right. Hey, folks, how's it going? It's Faz from Fazlifts. Now, we are resurrecting the Q&A. It's been a while since I've done that because I've been doing Q&As on my Patreon weekly. So if you would like access to that, my Patreon link is in the description. It's very cool. I've got a sort of a low tier option just to support me. I've got a mid tier option, which is the Q&A. However, I'm going to morph that rather than a Q&A. I'm going to morph it into just free access on Discord because I figure rather than waiting once a week to get an answer to your questions, actually, we can just hang out on Discord and I can answer your questions there. And then the third option is like a mini full coaching, which is quite cool. I've got a couple of guys doing that right now, and it's nice. It's a light touch coaching. So if you'd like to support me and get some access to those services, go ahead to Patreon. Also, with regards to coaching, I have about 4 spots left currently for coaching. I'm talking to 2 people right at the moment, 1 guy, 1 girl, so that might be down to 2. I limit the amount of people I coach just based on my schedule because I like to do a full detailed job with every client. So I've worked out what I can do during a week, and I have a set number. So currently I'm about 4 off that. I've had a couple of people drop out. So if you'd like to get in contact for coaching, just go ahead and throw me a message in the contact form in the description, and we can at least start a conversation. Okay, so let's crack on with the September Q&A. But firstly, yes, if you've probably noticed the Tash, I am always, as has been reaffirmed by the facial hair this week, I'm pretty much always about a shave and a haircut away from looking like a hobo. So I'm just glad that I'm not looking like I was last week. So let's get on with things. So first question. Now, this... I'm not going to bother answering this comment from Jeffrey, but I'll leave that one up for you guys to have a read yourself. Okay, so let's crack on with the first proper question. And it is from Thai Spirit. And the question is, time under tension a thing? And he follows up by saying, as per the arguments put forward by the HIT guys, that is the high intensity training guys, to justify hypertrophic stimulus from extended set durations. So the HIT guys are the high intensity advocates, the Mike Mensa offshoots, all that kind of stuff. And so I think there's a lot of parts to this question. So the first thing, let's cover time under tension. And then I also want to provide you with my thoughts on the HIT guys and their way of arguing and what that led to for them. So is time under tension a thing? Firstly, let's discuss what people refer to as time under tension. And then we can identify about 2 issues with that. So in general, what is referred to as time under tension is keeping the muscle under tension the entire time, so not having breaks. So typically, time under tension refers to staying in the set for as long as you can. And so that is providing the muscle, ideally, with a lot of stress without any breaks. That's the general idea. And this lends people to do things like not locking out the reps, doing very high reps, doing very slow reps, all to increase the time and attention. The volume takes a back seat because these guys don't really believe in volume. They believe in 1 set to failure. Volume takes a back seat. Form also somewhat takes a back seat because when it comes to extreme time and attention, you're not really supposed to lock out because that takes the tension off the muscle, apparently. And also, this has led to some of the ideas around rep speed being quite warped. Ty might remember this. I certainly remember it from when I was a kid. But there was a super slow HIT protocol. And the laughing thinking about it because it's the stupidest thing ever. But anyway, it was like 10 seconds up, 10 seconds down. That was a thing. People would lift like that. So that is what people describe as time and attention. Now, if we look at the validity of that, so here's the first thing. I think in favor of time and attention, because there's a reason why this was put forward. In favor of time and attention, at least what it does do is it tends to focus putting stress on the muscle. And that's quite a positive thing. That's actually not bad. That's good. You should try and emphasize targeting the muscle you're trying to work because this is a hypertrophy routine. You're not just supposed to be slanging weights up and down. So it's an evolution. It's certainly an evolution from, if you recall, the time and attention thing was really popularized about 20 years ago. And there was this big sort of mix of bodybuilding and hypertrophy and strength training and strongman and all that stuff together. And so a lot of people were lifting with quite bad form, and they were just lifting to get the weight up. So one thing that time and attention did do, which was quite beneficial, was it forced people to slow down and say, look, hold on a second, why don't you just target the musculature? And for all the complaints about HIT and like high intensity training, one thing we can say for traditional HIT was there was a massive focus on actually working the muscle. And I know this because I grew up around a lot of HIT guys. I was taught how to do the whole Dorian Yates style of training by guys who were taught by Dorian. I was taught that, and there was a massive focus on actually working the muscle. In fact, you could argue the HIT guys were probably more about working the muscle than the current crop of low intensity advocates, which come from, I don't know, the Jordan Peters camp, where it's all about moving weight and shifting iron. Back in the day, the high intensity guys were actually about training the muscle. So the time and attention thing was actually a good step in the right direction, in a sense. But it did have some problems. Now, the first thing is, if we are looking at how to perform a rep, very often these guys were trying not to lock out the weight. So they weren't locking out their squats or the leg presses or the bench presses because they were trying to keep the muscle under tension. Again, time under tension. The problem they made, though, was a lot of these guys would emphasize unbroken time under tension because they were only doing one set. So they were saying, keep as much tension on the muscle for as possible during that set. The problem with that is you actually lower overall tension. If you lock out the bench or the squat or the leg press or whatever, there's a couple of things that you do which allow you to get more stimulus. For the first part, you get a mini break, okay? Because a bench press locked out or a squat locked out or a leg press locked out is not going to provide the muscle with the same level of tension as you would, say, nearer the sticking point. So you get a bit of a mini break. The other thing is people who lock out also generally tend to lift and stretch the muscle to the other range of motion too. So you get the people locking out, full stretch, same with the squat. Generally speaking, it lends itself well to a full range of motion, which we know now to be better for hypertrophy. And the HIT guys, the older HIT guys back in the day, were generally a stickler for full range of motion and good form. So if you are lifting with time and attention, and what you're probably losing out on is you're not getting those mini breaks when you do lock out. The problem with that is you can actually get more reps. So in the end, you get more time and attention if you lock out. Now, they would argue that massively. They would say, no, you're going to lose all the tension. But actually, no, you get those little mini breaks where you do lock out. You can recuperate like a minuscule amount of strength. And by the end of the set, that can total up to 1 or 2 more reps. One of the things which people really exploit these days, which I actually don't like, is they take longer and longer rest between reps. And I think I don't like that because it's uncontrolled, it's unquantified. But a very short mini break between reps, which is quantified. And normally for me, it's lock out, breathe, go again. Lock out, breathe, go again. So a quantified mini break, so the lockout, that means it's quantified. It means it's the same every week, so I can manage my progression. But also within the set, it allows me to do a little bit more, but not to the point where I'm resting like 5 seconds between every rep, because that's just taking a mick. So I think you have to have a balance. I don't like the time and attention way of doing things by just keeping the muscle under strain, because the problem with that is you end up doing less. So you cut your volume down, you cut how many reps you can do in the set. You artificially induce this massive pump and lactic burn, which just forces your muscles to stop working. Whereas if you stretch out, do a nice full range of motion, lock out, and go again, that allows you in the end to do more reps with a full range of motion. So that's the first thing which is not great about it. Now, the other kind of mistake they used to make, got me thinking here. There's something else I was going to say about the time and attention guys. I think the first point, though, is really related to overall volume. So overall volume will be lower. So that's that. Now, I'll carry on with this, what I was going to say, the second part of what I was going to say, and I might come back to the other thing I was going to say. But just to kind of round that section out, yeah, I'm not a massive fan of the time and attention thing for that reason, because overall volume is a lot more tied to whether you're going to grow or not. Volume and then proximity to failure. Those are the big things. Think about it like this. Proximity to failure is how hard you're working. That is the strength of the signal that you're sending to your muscles to grow or not. The volume that you do, that is the sort of amplification of that strength, of that signal. So you can take a muscle close to failure, which is good. And then as long as you do more of that's basically like how much of amplification of that grow signal you're giving to your muscle. So time and attention does none of those things. It prevents you from working all out because you actually lose reps relative to locking out and short mini pauses. And on top of that, it lowers your intensity and it also lowers your overall volume. So it's one of those things where I think people are like chasing a feeling rather than thinking about things logically. And that kind of leads me on quite nicely to my next point. So just to round that point out, mechanically speaking, scientifically speaking, anecdotally speaking, I'm not a fan of time and attention, because in the end, if you want time and attention, just have short mini breaks. You'll get more time under tension. Also, the same guys who talk about time and attention, which is the HIT guys, tend to only do one set to failure. So if you want more time and attention, do another set. Like, that would be the simple solution, right? So none of it makes any sense. Now, this is where it takes me on to the next part of the question. Now, the next part of the question is this. I want to discuss a bit about how the HIT guys used to engage people in conversations, and one of the reasons why the HIT guys actually died out in the end. So I originally started this section off by praising the high intensity guys because they were giving us an insight into better bodybuilding practices. The problem is, though, the way that they grew, and I don't mean them as physically growing, but the way they grew as a community, they shot themselves in the foot, basically. So if you were ever on the forums in the early 2000s and you ran across one of these HIT guys, these HIT Jedis, because they all used to sound the same, all write the same. Typically, this is what they would do. They would ask an innocent question. They say, hey, could you explain this? Like, it was something which was going against the HIT grain. And you'd write down your reply. And then what they would do is they would come in and the second reply would attempt to completely eviscerate what you've written. So a very common tactic with these HIT Jedis is they would take every sentence of yours and quote it and answer back to that sentence. So if you'd written a paragraph, they would just quote every sentence, split it apart, and just try and just disprove everything you've said. So they were what I would refer to as arguing to win. Not arguing to learn, they were arguing to win. There was no real understanding of the entire argument. There was no wanting to understand the entire argument. Their entire way of attacking somebody's argument was mostly to attack their speech, how they wrote things, any inconsistencies in what they said, not trying to understand the other person's point of view, but trying to break them down and make them look like they didn't know what they were talking about. So they were arguing to win, or what you might refer to as sophistry if you're into Greek history. Now, the problem with that is, it's fine, you win internet points. Great, fantastic, well done. But the problem with that is, you lend yourself to BS because you believe your own hype. And if you're arguing to win, you can amass loads of points on the internet and you can pat yourself on the back. You can go back to your HIT Jedi forums and they can, I really nailed that guy. You can all feel good about yourself. But at the end of it, you're not growing. And you're not growing either physically or as a community. And as I said, I started off actually quite complimentary about the HIT Jedis, but the reason that they've all died out now, the reason there is no HIT community is because of that. They argued to win. Their entire mantra, maybe born from Mike himself, I don't know, but there's a reason why they called them HIT Jedis, because they all had this sort of very overly zealous look at diet, and that in diet groups now, and they all argue to win rather than arguing to learn. And it's very short-term thinking, because they can win the argument, but 20 years down the line, they've all died off because the shit doesn't work. Like, they never grew. They never learnt more. So these guys would win an argument, go back, carry on training with their dumbass training style, which didn't get them any results. And I'm not even talking about science here. I'm just talking about the fact they just weren't getting results. Not like it didn't match up with the science, but they weren't getting results. So they'd carry on not getting results. But because there'd be in these conversations, these arguments, they'd all be patting each other on the back. They all believed in it. Now, over time, the group members are going to slowly fall out. They go, actually, we're winning all these arguments, but we're not growing. And in the end, the movement dies, because you look at all these guys, these HIT Jedis, they all look like crap, first of all. And they're idiots. They're idiots because they're going on to these social media accounts, these forums, and they're making everyone look bad. They look just trying to make arguments. So it's not done in a friendly, encouraging way. It was all done in a very aggressive, arguing to win kind of way. And I think it teaches us a lesson. I think it'd be nice to do a video on these at some point, maybe some kind of case study. I don't know, maybe somebody like Natural Hypertrophy would be better off doing something like that. He's very good at these things. To put together a what happened to the HIT Jedis kind of video, because I think they teach us a very good lesson. And it's a lesson that I adhere to in my everyday life. Is you need people to be able to shit test you. And you need to be open to that shit testing. And this goes for every walk of life, whether it's your personal life, relationships, job, your hobbies, whether it's training or not. Training very often is a microcosm of life. And the HIT Jedis are a warning to all of us that we should not be too dogmatic, because you might win the argument, you might get some internet points, but it means nothing if you're just hurting your own progress as an individual. And that is ultimately, I feel, what happened to these guys. See, I've got a lot to say about them. I don't have any sort of grief. I actually had a friend of mine who was a super slow advocate, but this guy who I don't keep in touch with anymore, we trained together a few times. He was on drugs. He was enhanced. And this was long before I even knew much about them. And he said to me at the time, this is 15 years ago, whatever, I was at university. And he said to me, yeah, whenever I get on, I get really big. Whenever I come off, I shrink down. And it was a clear indicator to me now, looking back, like, that guy really didn't know how to train, but he could win an internet argument with the best of them. So what is that? So I just think it's one of those things where this example was so interesting to me, because I've seen the HIT Jedis and I've broadened it out, because there are lots of groups out there, whether it's the hard gainers who all have the same 12-inch arms as they did 20 years ago, but they insist their ways, and they insist anyone who actually managed to get bigger was either on steroids or whatever, or genetically gifted. There is the Hayes movement. There are various other dietary groups. There's just a lot of people out there. And what they do is they argue to win. They don't argue with an open mind. And oftentimes when we're looking for answers, we can look to these people because they sound like they know what they're doing. They sound like they've got all the answers. It's what drives social media. It's one of the reasons why Andrew Tate is so popular, right? It's like he makes definite statements, very divisive statements. It's probably also the reason why this channel that I have is never going to be 1 million subs, because that's not me. I'm not into making big, substantial claims which can't be refuted, because I'm still trying to learn. As much as I know now, I'm still trying to learn. I actually had a conversation with a fella on my channel yesterday who was talking about, who was trying to make a point about overhead work, and he was arguing to win. And I said to him, look, not everyone's going to fit into the same box, and it takes some intelligence to understand that. And he came back with the same arguments. I was like, this guy really doesn't get it. But anyway, my point with all of this is, arguing to win will only get you some short-term satisfaction. Long-term, you're actually fucking yourself. So don't do it. I'm not suggesting you're doing this, Ty, but as a general sort of lesson to everyone. Okay, I'll call it there for that question. That's a really good question. Hopefully you guys have taken something from that. All right, so Cameron says, hey Faz, what are your thoughts on the optimal push in lifting culture right now? More specifically, the people who let new research dictate their training heavily to where one day overhead tricep extensions are the best for the long head, and the next they throw them out completely off one study. Thank you for all the videos and content you put out. Thank you, Cameron. Yeah, no, it's a really good question. It's a really good question. So this is why I did that video a week ago where I said, overhead work, I'm not convinced. And it was one of my most popular videos. It seemed to have caused some waves in the online natural bodybuilding community, which is good. I just wanted people to think. Yeah, I'm very cautious. So one of the things is, I feel like we as the natural bodybuilding community, we are our own community. So I feel like we are halfway between the bro community and halfway between the evidence-based community. The bro community, who is very much influenced by drug culture. And basically, you can get away with a lot of shit and it's going to work because you're on drugs. So we're influenced by them somewhat because we do value anecdote. And on the other side of it, we are heavily influenced by the evidence-based bros who lean on science tremendously. Now, they both have their issues. The bros lean on anecdote, which a lot of that comes from druggies. And it's very difficult to quantify that knowledge. I'm not saying all advice from druggies is pointless, because I think that would be a bit naive. But you have to wonder, is it this special technique? Is it this level of volume? Or is it just like you're jabbing whatever? And then with the evidence-based guys, they're not infallible either, because hypertrophy research is so new. Like, we're not talking about strength research here. We're talking about specific hypertrophy research. It's very new. Like, it's been around, as I've made this point a few times, it's really only been around formally since the worm bomb study, which I think was 2009. If somebody might correct me in the comments, but I think worm bomb was 2008 or 2009. So it's really only been around for about 14 years, which is still very new if you think about it. Strength research has been around for decades and decades, since the 60s. The Russians and the Soviets were doing research way back in the day, and we have these amazing books from strength. But for hypertrophy, we don't have that. So anyway, the evidence guys lean very heavily on the research, which is very new and is prone to errors. The bros lean very heavily on drug culture, which has its own problems. I feel like we're in the middle, and we have pros, we have cons. The pros for us are, whatever we do, it needs to work because we don't have the drugs to push the growth. The cons are, I don't feel there are enough people in our community right now to shit check some of the science. Yeah, I don't. And that's why I put the video out. There are not enough people to shit check the science, which seems to pervade. In the evidence-based circles, there are a lot of people who post, even they get carried away a lot, but there are a lot of counterpoints to researchers come out, which is good. And they tend to discuss research quite heavily, probably more so than anecdote, which is wrong, because being evidence-based means you should take both into account. But a lot of them tend to lean on the research quite heavily. So I find we get influenced by that, but the problem we have as a group is we generally aren't very good at interpreting scientific research. And I'm actually trying to get on the podcast a guy called Alan Flanagan, who's a very well-respected nutrition researcher from London. And I wanted to get him on specifically to discuss how to spot quacks, how to spot quackery, and how not to get duped by bad science and stuff like that. Because I think there's quite a lot of that in our community. And I see it mostly in diet circles. I think training-wise, it's not as bad. But I see a lot of people being duped in diet circles, and to their detriment. It's not good. Yeah, I think the optimal push in lifting culture, and particularly in our lifting culture right now, is one which is it. I think people just aren't very good at understanding research. Yeah, be honest. And I think what happens is they'll see a piece of research, there'll be some momentum being generated with that research with a lot of people in the community, and then people just start to basically placebo themselves into believing it. And I should say at this point, I'm not denying anyone's experience, because I think that's not very good either. But it's when people start to say overhead tricep work is the best for everyone, I'm like, yeah, that's not what built my triceps. It was just the bigger my bench was, the bigger my triceps were, the bigger my dips were, the bigger my triceps were. And I don't want to deny anyone else's experience, but people have been in the comments denying my experience, and that's wrong. Like, you can't do that. Going back to the guy I mentioned, I actually had a guy I don't know if he did it on purpose, but he tried to make out that I had been doing some kind of skull crusher my entire powerlifting career, when I'd specifically said in the video I hadn't been. So he was seeing things and hearing things to fit his bias. And even when I corrected him, he still didn't believe it. So I'm like, I've got a guy here who, no disrespect to him, but he's not very well developed, and he's denying my 15 years of experience, having not done any overhead tricep work. And I'm like, not everyone's going to fit into the same box. And this is what I said to him. I said, if you have, it's a sign of intelligence to understand that not everyone's going to fit into the same box. And it's the same with this stuff. I have no problem with Jeffrey Veritas Schofield saying overhead tricep work has helped me, because great, he looks great, he's growing, cool, fantastic. What I do have a problem with is anybody else, like this guy who's in my comments yesterday, telling me my experience isn't right. Because you can't deny people's experiences. That's not the basis for learning. That's the basis for, again, these HIT Jedis who don't learn. You can win some internet points, but in reality, you're screwing yourself. I think at his level of development, it probably doesn't matter. He can do whatever he likes and he'll probably grow. But the point stands. I'm very cautious about these optimal pushes, mostly because they try and fit everyone into the same box. And again, it's very similar to the HIT Jedis. The big problem I have with high intensity training is not the fact it's low volume. It's the fact that everything for every body part is the same. That's just weird. At no point do you want the same volume for every body part at all times, because nobody's that gifted. I need more work for my biceps. I need more work for my shoulders. I know that now. I need a lot less work for my calves. I need no work for my forearms at all. I need less work for my chest. So it makes no sense to try and fit everyone into the same box. And it's whether that's overhead tricep extensions for everybody, whether it's 10 to 20 sets, whatever it is, like we're all individuals. And part of people's push towards finding the optimal denies the outliers. And we all have, some of us, a lot of us have needs which are out of the ranges or on the extreme end or on the lower end, and that changes even within the same body. So part of what I dislike about optimal is you're basically trying to fit everyone into that square box. I'm a circle, some of the guys are triangle. It doesn't work that way, and that's my big problem with optimal. It's not optimal. It's trying to fit everyone in the same box, and we're all individuals. We need to broaden out from that. We need to have a broader perspective. So yeah, I'm not a big fan, as you can tell, of the optimal push. I'm actually going to call it there. I did have one more question lined up, but it's already been half an hour, so we'll call it there. Thank you all so much for tuning in. It feels great to be back. I got that food poisoning throat thing. It put me out for a long time. I was feeling really under the weather for a while, and you know what it's like. You only realize how bad you were feeling when you feel better. And this week, literally for the first time, I'm like, whoa, I feel like myself again. I'm feeling better. All good. Take care, everyone. And I'll speak to you in the next one.